I'm Sherry.
And I'm Chris, Big Stick.
And we are Bourbon Besties.
So tonight is our second lesson into your degree in BS, bourbon stuff. So if you followed us last week, you saw that we talked about flavors having to do with finishes. Well, we started thinking, what else changes the flavor of bourbon? So we're going to get into that. But first, watch this.
Welcome back. I think we should, as we always do, start with cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers. Tonight in my glass I have Four Roses single barrel. I'm not saying that it's foreshadowing, but it might be foreshadowing.
And tonight I'm drinking Natterjack Irish whiskey. This was a birthday present from a good friend of mine. It's got a minty finish to it. It's actually, it's weird, but it's really good. 126 proof. Let's go.
Let's go. All right. So, as Chris mentioned, we were kind of talking about finishing giving flavor, and then we were starting to talk about, okay, well, what else gives things flavor? And my innate answer was, it's got to be the mash bill. So our original plan for tonight was actually to only talk about mash bills, and I had done a ton of research about mash bills, and we will do that. But that led me down a rabbit hole. And that is a thing that happens a lot with me. I'll get an idea and then I'll read something and I'll read something else and then I'll be like, I didn't know that, I didn't know that, I didn't know that. And then the next thing I know, 3.5 hours is gone and now I can tell you all kinds of things that I didn't know before. And what I realized in doing that was suddenly things that I thought I understood, now I really understood. About a month or maybe 2 months ago, our friend John over at Gentleman and Whiskey did a video about basically how to craft his perfect whiskey, how to Frankenstein it together. And I did it, but I don't think I really fully understood it, and now I feel like I do. So I think that a lot of it has to do with all these things that do with flavor that I didn't even realize. So I didn't tell Chris what all of the things I researched were. I thought it would be so much more fun to let him guess. So let's start with, aside from the mash bill, which obviously I have mentioned.
Can we include finishing, or are we taking that one out
and
too?
Finishing is out. So aside from the mash bill and finishing, what do you, and you guys in the comments can certainly let us know too, what do you think affects the flavor of bourbon? Wish I had the Jeopardy music.
Aging.
Okay. Now, when you say aging, do you mean the age of the whiskey?
No, the age of the distiller. You know, if they're older, then the whiskey's got to be better, right? Like if it's an 80-year-old make, right? Isn't it? No? Oh, no.
So just how old the whiskey is?
Yeah.
Okay. So...
the older the better, right? I mean...
well, that is a point of contention. For me, I would say no. I think that once things get to a certain age, they tend to be over oaked for my palate. Now, some people love a 23-year-old bourbon or whiskey, but I have found those to be over oaked for my palate. Honestly, even most 15s are over oaked for my palate. I don't even really love most 12 years. I tend to play more in that maybe like 6 to 10 year range. That's the sweet spot for me as far as aging goes. But when I think of aging, I'll let you answer too. So, do you think that the older it is, the better it is?
I mean, I think I'm kind of with you with the 6 to 10 years because I don't like my stuff really, really, really oaky. I mean, we know that I've already, you described one of the whiskeys as chewing on a tree, so.
This sounds like a fun blind later for Chris.
Here we go. Got to put me on the spot all the time.
All the time. So when I think of aging, I also think of not just how old the bourbon is, but also how it is aged, right?
So now we're getting into casks.
Yes, sort of. So I'm saying more about where it's getting aged. So as we know, if you age something in the state of Texas, it ages very different than it does in Kentucky.
Okay.
Right?
Sure.
Because of the climate.
Mm-hmm.
So that's part of the aging process.
So geographical location.
Sure. But also location within the rick house. So if you're on the bottom floor versus being on the top floor, heat rises. Right? So depending on where you are in the rick house itself, that's also part of the aging process. Where in the rick house you are, where in the world, not even saying the country, because certainly you could have Japanese whiskey or Irish whiskey or all kinds of world whiskeys, right? Mm-hmm. To your point, foreshadowing. So I think that aging encompasses so many different things, right? So not just how old the bourbon is or the whiskey, but also how it gets aged.
So maybe we need to say aging process.
Sure. I mean, I think aging covers it. I think aging is good. It just has, aging to me has a lot of subsets. And I could probably spend the entire episode just on that. But I won't. We'll do that another time.
Okay.
So besides aging, what else do you think affects the flavor of the bourbon? I cheated because I know some of them that I know he won't know.
Are we going to go with what our buddy John talks about all the time? And how higher proof it has better flavor. So that would that be distilling? Or would that be after distilling, adding the water to it, proofing it down, or not proofing it down?
Proof is tough because proof applies both. So the proof that it enters the barrel, the proof that it exits the barrel, the proof where they are proofing down and adding water. I think that proof is kind of a question mark for me. And that's because I have had some low proof bourbons that are incredibly flavorful. So when we talk about flavor, I have a hard time categorizing proof as one of the things. I do think that higher proof bourbons tend to be more complex. I do think that for some people, however, a high proof will obliterate their palate to where they don't taste anything at all. Yeah. Pure gasoline.
Yeah, I can agree with that.
So I'm going to say, in my opinion, I'm going to discount proof off of flavor.
She would.
Shocking.
Just make me look bad.
I don't think it makes you look bad. Do you? You didn't say that. You said John said that. Do you think that proof makes it...
To a point, yes, maybe. I mean, again, depends on how high proof you get. You get into the hazmats. I mean, and it also depends on your palate. Because I think, if you're not used to drinking, high proofs, it's gonna burn you. Like,
for sure.
All you're gonna taste, like you said, is gasoline. So, hot. For me, some of the high proof stuff is really good, and I could drink a Stag at 130 proof and tell you.
But do you think you get more flavor notes off of that Stag than you do, say, like a lower proof, like a proofed down, I don't know, an Angel's Envy? Do you think that you're really getting more flavor from it, or you're getting more hug from it? That's where That's where I can't answer for proof. So I'm going to stand by my thing. For me, I'm going to discount proof.
Throw it out.
I'm going to discount proof off of flavor.
Discount?
Yes.
50% off. So, okay.
All right. So, proof is a question mark for me. So
question mark for me.
We'll say proof is a question mark. What else do you think maybe affects the flavor?
So, if you're saying that proof isn't part of the distillation, maybe it's distillation?
So, I definitely think that distillation counts. And I think distillation, again... Let's keep it within the still, right? So what can affect it in the still? I'm going to discount everything that is before that. So not counting anything in the mash bill, not anything that goes into it before it goes into the barrel. I'm going to say just the distillation process. So how could distilling affect it? And I think that, for me, I'm going to be honest, I wouldn't have been able to answer this before today. I cheated. I did some research. I read some things. So I can say that the distilling, one of the things that I probably would have picked up on and gotten was the different types of stills. The column stills, like we've seen. Chris and I have been to a bunch of distilleries for tours. So there are column stills, there are pot stills, and I definitely think that there is a reason certain distilleries use the type of still that they use.
Sagamore had the column.
Sagamore had the column.
And didn't Garrison Brothers have the...
A pot still.
Yes.
Yes.
So look at me.
Look at you.
And they also had naked women in the bathroom on the wall.
Lord.
Anyway, sorry.
So in addition to that, there's also, is it triple distilled? How much of the distilling process is there? So what I learned today in the distilling process that I'll be honest, I didn't know, is that part of the distilling is that there are different cuts, and those cuts get blended, and that's the head, the heart, and the tails, and they all get blended together to make the whiskey. And again, we could do a whole video about that, and maybe we will. So I'm gonna say that based on the distillation process, absolutely affects the flavor.
Okay.
I think it definitely does. I think
Okay.
that can definitely play into the flavor.
Okay. Cool. So that's 2 for me, right?
You okay? You got any others?
I'm not sure, to be honest. I mean, we've already said, because proof, so adding water, some people say that we're talking drops of water. So I don't know. I mean,
So I'm gonna take your bait, okay? And I'm gonna tell you one that I didn't see anywhere, but I heard on a
my bait.
Yeah, you didn't mean to. You've inspired me with what you said. So proof, perhaps not, but I do think that water affects the flavor of the whiskey at hand. And here is what I think. Now, I didn't see it anywhere. I didn't read this anywhere, but on different tours we've been on, a lot of people talk about where they get the water from and how the water affects the flavor. And that's something that
Sagamore.
at Sagamore they talk about that. I know that's a big thing for Tennessee whiskey, where the water comes from. So
Not the tap.
I think that the water affects the flavor of the whiskey, which I guess part of that is kind of like, okay, so there's obviously the mash bill, but then there's kind of this like others category, right? So there's the water, and then in kind of tandem with that, I don't know how much that affects it. I believe it does, but I don't know how much. I think that there's also prep before it, goes into the barrel. Do you know how they prep the barrels?
They char them.
They char them.
We're not talking Charizard from Pokemon. We're talking char. They burn them. So then wouldn't the type of barrels change flavors as well?
Well, every barrel to be a bourbon has to be a specific new oak barrel. But what can affect it is the char within the barrel, right?
Okay.
So when we think about like a toasted barrel versus, a heavy char 4, I think the amount of char within the barrel absolutely is going to affect the flavor of the bourbon. And I think that is a known, because a lot of times they'll even list it. That's one of the things that Penelope does. It'll list on the bottle. We have a friend who may or may not have read heavy as honey, and they got all excited for me and told me that they had found a honey bottle, but really it was a heavy char bottle.
In his defense,
It does look like it.
Oh,
I mean,
God,
it's like handwritten, and it does look like it. And it was very sweet. So I think that char 100% definitely is going to affect the flavor of the bourbon.
But aren't there different kinds of oak trees?
Aren't there different kinds of oak trees? There are different types of oak
Who's
trees.
to say that different oak trees make different barrels, make different flavors, make different char, which makes Big Stick right?
Well, it makes you right for whiskey, but wrong for bourbon, because
God damn it.
the TTB says that it has to be a new American oak barrel. So if it's bourbon, then it can only be one type of oak. But if it is whiskey, which we've certainly been talking about, including your Irish whiskey, then yes, it could be different types of barrels.
See,
in that.
I was right. I knew it.
You're right for whiskey. So, is there anything else that you know of that affects the flavor?
Well, you took Mashbill from me, so
I did.
That's not fair.
So, post Mashbill, and this is something that I would have never thought about, because I just thought it was how they turned the grain into sugar, is the yeast. Now, I know yeast is part of the process, and I've always known yeast is part of the process, but it never occurred to me that yeast dramatically affects the flavor. And today, I learned so much today. Today I learned, and I knew, but I guess I just never connected it. So I chose Four Roses tonight because Four Roses has a 5-strain proprietary yeast program. So they use all their different yeasts to get all these different flavors. They mix them up depending on what rick house it's in and where it's at. And that's when you get all of those ones that are like the OBVS, and everybody has all those different ones. I think that there's 10 different recipes.
ESPN.
I didn't realize that a big part of that is the yeast. I also didn't know, and I learned this word today, that the yeast, when it is creating all that CO2 and it's eating up all that sugar or whatever it does, it makes the aromatic, that's all the smells, they all come from the yeast. And I didn't know that. Those have a very special name called esters.
Why have I heard that before?
I don't know. But I had never heard it, and it was pretty cool.
No, I've heard the word, not...
Or are you thinking about like a gaggle of little old ladies named Esther?
No, Ethel's.
So, just circling back to recap the things that we believe affect the flavor of bourbons / whiskeys are going to be the aging process, distillation, the water,
yeast,
char,
and did we say aging?
and aging.
Look at me.
And maybe proof. Certainly a finished barrel will affect the flavor. We're going to discount that for today because we're talking about baseline information. Those are the things we think affect the flavor. What do you guys think affects the flavor of bourbons and whiskeys? And which ones do you think matter the most? That's the question I'm honestly not sure about. So I would love to know in the comments from you guys which ones you think matter the most. Did we miss any? Do you think that proof affects flavor?
I know one person who's going to say that proof affects flavor.
I think so too.
I'm looking at you, John. So.
I think that's it.
I think you're right. I think there's only one thing left to say.
Is it that we should tell them how much we would appreciate if you would like, comment, and subscribe on our video?
Yeah. And again, as I always say, if you have ideas for future content, drop us a line on one of our many social medias, or just leave a comment here with an idea and we'll see what we can do.
And with that, we are Bourbon Besties. The water.
Yeah.
Distillate.
Wow.
Distillation. Here we go.
It's been a long night.
You want to try it again?